Some of you have seen those documents. So some of the questions that I have relative to the issue at hand were, there may be a legitimate reason for the firefighters to arbitrate from the 2012 contract where language was not specific or wasn't spoken in good faith, what have you. But in 2015, that language was clear in the contract. It was clear in the fiscal note. It was clear in the tentative agreement. And it was signed by the union president and the fire chief. Now all of a sudden, the mayor wants to take the 24 men that were hired in 2016 and roll them back into the Tier 1 system. And he has no legal grounds to do that. Why is he doing that? So now is the fire department's position saying, well, we actually didn't discuss it in private, or we actually thought this meant something else. The fire department signed a contract. They accepted the contract and the tentative agreement. And not only did they do that in 2015, but then they went back, and when they implemented the language into the 2015 contract, they made another change on vacation pay, where unused vacation pay was paid out at 1/5 of the firefighter's salary. They changed that fraction to 1/4. And that was a cause for just under $100,000 of money to be paid out, which was not in the tentative agreement, it was not in the fiscal note, and it never came before the city council to be discussed, and you never saw it.
And Mr. Cody, again, just another point, that was also the policy, I believe, that Mayor Solomon stopped in June.
That's correct.
Correct? Okay.
Yes, I give him credit. Unfortunately, he stopped it, but we did not get restitution, and that amounts to almost $500,000. Because of what Mr. Block and I had discovered and disseminated and brought before the council, this council, under Council President Solomon, hired a third-party CPA firm. And one of the things that they were tasked to do was to figure out exactly how much money was taken, let's say for lack of a better term, under false pretenses, right? That was not in accordance with what was ratified. The city council put forth tens of thousands of dollars to that third-party accounting firm. And that began in February 20th of 2018, and as of this date, we have not seen that accounting. Now, I know what the number is, and certain members of the city council know what the number is. But that document needs to be released because the taxpayers paid for it. And it's a document that's relevant to this conversation in a lot of ways. So, you know, I heard what the esteemed attorney, Mr. Reguster, spoke about. And one of the things he said was that there was little chance to overturn this arbitration ruling unless, of course, you could find, for example, fraud, which is what he said about an hour and a half ago. So I want to ask the city council, when a collective bargaining unit comes before you and you sign and ratify a contract, and then behind your back they go and they manipulate the language to be paid out monies that you weren't aware of, that you didn't ratify, that you didn't know about, the taxpayer didn't know about it, and those monies were paid out through electronic wire transfer in most cases. Is that not fraud? Is that good faith collective bargaining, or was it a mistake? Was it a mistake? You know, a mistake is your wife tells you to go to the market and get 6 apples and you come home with 6 oranges. Not we have a collective bargaining agreement that's looked over by lawyers and city solicitors and city council solicitors, and then we find out only because of the due diligence of taxpayers that the numbers don't add up, and we have an element of, let's call it deception. I don't want to use the harsh term fraud. I don't want to offend anybody. But on face value, was that what we bargained for? Was that the bill of goods that the city of Warwick residents were sold? No, it wasn't. And more importantly, the city council was deceived by this not good faith collective bargaining, by the deception that went on behind closed doors, by certain members of the former administration that knew all about it. But we're to assume now that those same members now in this administration are coming forth before this council and before these taxpayers, touting this new contract as this is wonderful, and it's going to save us all kinds of money. I find it very interesting that on page 2, the mayor states that the implementation, that this is page 2 of the documentation that includes the red line contract. This is the mayor's cover letter. On page 2, he states that the implementation of the 24-hour system could save the city money. Could save the city money. You could be a winner, right? But there's nowhere in that contract where it shows this is how much it's going to save. And if he was so confident that this system is going to save the city money, why is there a clause in there that says, well, if it doesn't save us any money and it winds up costing us more money, we can revert back to the old system? There's no one on the city council and nobody in this audience that would enter into a contract with such ambiguous language. It sets you up for failure, and it sets you up for litigation. And this type of sloppiness is exactly why you're in litigation now. And to the point of litigation, I don't see anybody discussing tonight where when we roll back these 24 firefighters that were hired in 2016 under a contract that they signed, that was ratified in accordance with the city charter rules and regulations, we're going to roll them back into the system along with members from the 2011-2012 era, which again, I don't have an issue with that. I think that's a legitimate point to argue. However, when we do this, the cost, the immediate cost of this, if you look at the city website and you look at the financial documents that were put forth, the cost is $2.8 million to just roll them back in the back pay. And that doesn't include any increase in the ARC payment, which is yet to be determined. Now, as Mr. Marola stated, we can only raise $8.3 million a year with a maximum tax increase. When you read the city document clearly states we don't have the $2.8 million to pay them back, so we're going to have to finance that over 20 years. And that payback now becomes $4.5 million. Nobody's spoken about that tonight. So we're hearing that we could possibly save $300,000. Okay, let's look at the credit side, and I said this before, let's ignore the debit side, right? So we already have $4.5 million that we have to pay back. You're also poised to sign a contract where you have a provision in arbitration that has yet to be settled. How can you do that? You can't predict the numbers. And by the way, the question that I would have to anyone on the finance, to my city councilman, Mr. McAllister, when they do settle that provision in arbitration that's still outstanding for the raise in 2018, is that going to affect retroactively their pay? Do you have the answer for that?
Mr. Cody, I think that it would be more prudent to ask the finance people from the city whether or not they have that answer.
Okay, well, the only reason I wanted to ask...
Which is fine if you want to do that.
Yeah, the only reason I wanted to ask my councilman or any other councilman is for one reason. Have you been provided that information? So I would ask you again, Mr. McAllister, have you been provided that information?
I'll answer the question.
Oh, I actually want Mr. McAllister on the Finance Committee to answer the question because he's my council member, and I want to have a feeling that he actually has a fundamental grasp on all of these ambiguous issues.
If I'm going to check on procedure first before he answers the question.
Please, thank you.
To the solicitor, are we allowed to answer questions, or are we strictly here to hear testimony? Legal opinion.
This is on the docket. It's been published under the Open Meetings Act, so you can answer questions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So my question stands to my council member. Has this been presented to you, and do you know the intricacies of whether or not this retroactive pay raise, how it's going to affect their pay previous and the overtime that we've paid out? Are we going to have to pay them retroactive on the overtime? And what is the financial impact of that?
So, Mr. Cody, wouldn't it be better, because I'm answering the question if you want to ask me, and I haven't seen it in here, and I can tell you I spent about 30 hours going through this contract. Yeah, it's very confusing, as is contracts in general. You get into the contracts that we do on a day-to-day business venue, and they can be confusing, let alone all the legal terminology, et cetera, that's in this contract or
Right.
any other contract. So, with having said that, I don't know if the answer to that question. I would suggest you defer the question to the finance person in the city of Warwick and ask them that question.
I actually know the answer to the question.
No, now that
Right.
you asked the
But
question, excuse me, Mr. Cody, now that you've asked the question, I want to get the answer from the finance director, if that's okay.
All right, I have no problem with
Okay.
that. But I think the point that I'm trying to make is, in the past, we've had contracts before that come before the city council where members of the council don't understand them. And this is extremely important. And I want to know from my council member, who obviously doesn't want to answer this question, does he know the answer? Is he familiar with the intricacies of the contract? So I'll accept that as a no, and we can get to the finance people in a minute.
So, Brian, if you could just come to the podium and answer the question.
As mentioned previously, this is still an arbitration item. We're not going to get into the details of that, but the funds are budgeted within the FY20 budget, and the funds are available. And it is not a fiscal impact to the city.
Okay.
It absolutely... See, this is the great play on words. It absolutely has an impact to the city because you're paying out more money. Whether or not it was budgeted for the 2020 contract is irrelevant. You spent monies in the 2019 contract, in the 2019 budget. We thought that was a closed deal and a closed budget, right? But now, because of what's taken place, we have to allocate more money. So Brian, I don't know how Brian can come up and say, oh, it has no impact to the city. Is it make-believe money? It has an impact to the city. You have to pay them back. And when you had $2.9 million worth of overtime, and now you're saying, well, depending on arbitration, if it's 1.5%, if it's 3%, whatever the percentage is, and we have to go back to that overtime line item and increase it, does it have an impact to the city? Yes, it does. Of course it does. And it has an impact to these taxpayers. So I want to go down the list, and Mr. Lattisaw, I have some questions that I'm going to ask. I have a copy for you, so you can have it for later on if you want to reflect on them. So I'm going through the contract. On page 30, it discusses holiday pay. It may be a simple thing, but we've already seen how simple language complicates things. Holiday pay states that the member shall be paid 1/4 of his weekly pay on holiday. But it indicates that the member shall be paid 1 1/4 of his weekly pay. Maybe it's a typo, probably is. But you sign this contract tonight and you own it. And that's a point that they could arbitrate. So what are we paying them? Are we paying 1/4 of the week's pay? Or are we paying 1 1/4 of the week's pay? I don't know if anyone else picked that up in the contract, but it's there. That's in the contract. It's on page 30 under holiday pay. And it's page 30 according to, you know, that contract says the numbers are going to change. It's page 30 on the red line document that you guys have.
It's also on page 30 in the full contract too.
Correct.
Mr. Cody, you said you had a copy of those questions that you were going to give me?
Yes.
May I have it?
Sure.
Through the clerk, please. Thank you.
Another one on sick leave, right? So we have a projection that the city is going to save a certain amount of money because we're going to reduce the sick leave from 20 days to 16 days, correct? And Brian and other members have Brian and Mr. D'Amico have come before you, given you some projections. I don't know how accurate they are, that we're going to reduce the sick time from 20 to 16 days. But I think everybody needs to read it, because the immediate sentence after that states that at the discretion of the chief, he can allocate additional sick time. So what does that mean? How much additional sick time? Are there any parameters? The language is so vague that on day one, when you implement this contract, the chief of the department can say, hey, guess what? Everybody gets another 4 sick days. Nothing you can do about it. That sentence needs to come out of that contract. And another question I would ask my council member in terms of sick time, are you aware of how much sick time that the fire department has in the bank, Mr. McAllister? Steve? You don't want to answer this one either?
Mr. President.
Hold on.
Okay, thank you.
We go through the chair. The chair
Through the chair. Can I ask my
Okay.
council member?
You have a right to ask the question.
Mr. McAllister, are you aware of how much sick time the fire department has in the bank as of this date?
At this time, I am here to listen to the public for their comments, so you can ask your question, and I would refer you to any member of the administration here that can answer those questions for
Okay.
you. I'm using this time to listen to the public, to hear your concerns.
And again, Mr. Harrington said we could ask you questions, but obviously you don't want to answer that question, which tells me that you don't know. So I'll give you that information. As of February of 2019, the Warwick Fire Department had 22,850 days of unused sick time in the bank. That's, to simplify it for you, that's 62.4 years of unused sick time in the bank. That number came to me through a records request. It's an official document from the city of Warwick. So why would we have to have a stipulation in the sick time that at the sole discretion of the chief, he can allocate more sick time? That sentence needs to go from this contract. It's ambiguous. It has no boundaries. Is it 2? Is it 5? Is it 500? There's no boundaries, and it's unenforceable. So I would beg that the city council really look at that and strike that, because it's a ridiculous provision in the contract. I've spoken about this before on page 32 and 33, Mr. Chairman, in terms of uniform allowances. Here's some more language that's ambiguous. In the last contract, we gave out just under $1 million, 900,000 and change, for uniform allowances and uniform maintenance. $1,450 per man per year. Not one penny of that is accountable for. And in the next sentence, what's it state? If the man's uniform becomes damaged, then we pay for it anyway. So it's not a uniform allowance, it's deferred compensation. So let's call it what it is. There's no situation where the man is going to have to come out of pocket and buy a uniform. If his uniform gets damaged on the job, he doesn't call Joe, the uniform guy, and say, hey, I need 2 more uniforms. He goes to the city and says, I damaged my uniforms. They say, oh, here's some new ones. He doesn't use uniform allowance. It's deferred compensation. Now, whenever that was negotiated, I don't know why it was negotiated, but if it's deferred compensation, if it's some type of a perk, call it that. But it's clearly not uniform allowance, and it's deceptive, and I think that's another area in the contract that you need to look at. On page 46, paragraph E, it talks about the pay that a member will receive if he has to go to court or if he has to prepare papers off the job. Not sure what that means. If he has to prepare papers, maybe that's the writing of grants, maybe that's, I don't know what it could be because it's vague. But it says that the individual will be paid at time and a half based on a 40-hour work week. From everything that we've said here tonight and all of the contract data, it says that the fire department is based on a 42-hour work week, correct? So why are you basing time and a half for these activities based on a 40-hour work week? Work week's not 40 hours. It's 42 hours. That's already been established. So I think there's some corrective measures that need to be taken there. Because again, it's ambiguous language. I also want to talk about something that nobody wants to talk about is substitutions. All right? The ability, you guys can come to the mic if you like.
Excuse me, Mr. Cody, do not be
The ability-
Mr. Cody,
Yeah.
I give a lot of latitude. Please do not address the members of the public and exercise due respect, please.
And they should do the same.
I just said so.
So, under substitutions, we had a situation with substitutions. Under the contract guidelines, it states that substitutions are allowable by written permission from the chief only, from the battalion chief. We went down this road and we found out that that wasn't the case. We also found out that under the Secretary of State's regulations of record retention, that those requests for leave under substitution were supposed to be maintained for 4 years. They were destroyed then, and they're being destroyed now. In the 2018 budget hearings, then Fire Chief McLaughlin had stated that it's a mutual exchange of time and it's done on the honor system. Meaning, if one firefighter substitutes for another firefighter, then that firefighter owes him that back. But you're not keeping any records of it. And the official records that we receive from the city shows that that's not being done. We have individuals with 25 and 30 days of substitution that haven't paid any of them back. And if you recall, in the city of Boston, that became a really big deal because people were going out the door with pay and benefits, and they had not paid those back. So I understand that in emergency situations, substitution is a valid tool. I don't think it's a tool that can be used to play baseball when we had, in one weekend last year, 41 substitutions so members could go play softball. What comes first? What's the priority? Softball or your obligation to the city and to your job? So the problem with substitution is that no records were being kept at the time. Now, unless something's changed, if it has been changed, that language should be in the contract, but that provision has been abused for years, and it needs to end.
Mr. Cody, let me ask you a question. So you stated, and correct me if I misunderstood, you stated that this type of thing with the documentation of sick time, swapping time, whatever, was something that was going on in the past, correct?
Yes.
You also said, and it's still going on now.
Yes. Well, as of 2018, it was still going on.
Okay, that's a big difference.
Yep.
So my question to you is, do you have definitive proof that that is going on now?
No,
I'm
but
clarifying. Mr.
no.
Cody, I'm clarifying the statement.
No, but
Okay,
I also
what's fair is fair here.
Right. I also have no documentation to show that anything has been changed. What I do have is a letter from the Secretary of State that states that they came to the city of Warwick and that the fire department did not even have a records retention program, which they're obligated to do by law.
That was in the past, right?
Right.
Okay.
So what I'm saying now, there's nothing in this contract that shows any language that is different from in the past.
But I cannot, let me back, it is not fair to stand there and say that it continues to go on now.
No, I
Because
know,
you don't know
I
that.
have a document from the Secretary of State that it indicates that they are disposing of the documents. I have
You
it from the Secretary of
document
State.
from the Secretary of State.
Yeah, and I got that in the
stating
summertime.
that's going on.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know if it's been changed. My point for bringing up this about substitutions is it hasn't been used on the honor system. The documents that we have from the city show clearly that it's not a mutual exchange of time. And all I'm saying is that you need to look at this and you need to say, look, if you're going to substitute for another guy, a piece of paper goes in your file, so at any time a member of the city council or a member of the executive board of the executive branch of government can go and say, hey, Joe, you took off 27 changes of shift this year. How many did you give back? That's all I'm saying. The way it was done in the past, much like the way these contracts were brought before you in the past, was sloppy. And it's something that should be addressed, and we should know if in fact it was changed. I will applaud that. What changes were made and how has it been corrected? So I'll move off of that topic. So, page 49, Article 11 on salaries. The table lists the salaries and the raise schedule, but it doesn't list the impact of the 2018 retroactive raise that is now in arbitration. So those numbers are all wrong, right? They haven't assumed the increase from 2018. That's still before arbitration. So you actually have a list of salaries in this contract before you that are completely incorrect. And every one of them is going to change. So how do you vote on a contract when that information is missing? One of the other situations that we had, Mr. Lattisaw, and you spoke about this at length, was on page 47, section 6 on medical exams. So we knew that in 2012, the language for medical exams was removed from the contract, but yet, and even a fiscal note was shown of what the benefit was in terms of savings, but yet that line item continued to be funded for 6 years. Once again, without this council knowing about it. That impact was over $325,000 over those 6 years. We know that the money wasn't used. At least a very large portion of it wasn't used. And at the time, the chief came before you and said, well, you know, we need this money, so when we get new recruits, they have to go through a medical exam. But that's not what the language says in section 47, on page 47, section 6. The language says that any current member over the age of 45 can voluntarily elect to have a medical exam. Well, now all of a sudden, we're funding that line item again. The mayor put it back in. And he spoke that night here at the budget hearings, stating that we need to have money in there to perform medical examinations for new recruits. If that, in fact, is the case, then the language should reflect that. But the language doesn't reflect that. The language states any member over the age of 45 has the right to a voluntary medical examination. So if you've allocated X amount of thousands of dollars to a line item on medical exams for members over the age of 45, my question would be, can you legitimately expend those dollars for new recruits that are not over the age of 45? So that's more language, I think, that needs to be looked at. And I'll close by saying to the members of the City Council, the way in which these contracts have been negotiated in the past, the residents have gotten burned. And they've gotten burned because this was not good faith collective bargaining. And I'll use Mr. Augusta's words on page 42 of his dissenting argument, that the method employed by the fire department was manipulative and amounted to chicanery. I would really like to see some evidence in the future that the chicanery is in the past and good faith is here present. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Please identify yourself for the record.
Excuse me. Robert Cushman, former Ward 1 councilman. Let me give you a little bit of background. I have a master's in business administration. I'm working for one of the largest companies in America today. I just want to tell you a little bit about what I want to concentrate on is this new OPEB trust fund. And, you know, when I look at this, and I just want to digress a little bit about the work that I do every single day, what you're doing here is you're setting up a new system. And as a business analyst, this is one of the things that I do every single day, is I meet with many of the users in the company, and they come up with, you know, projects in terms of maybe modifying a system or creating a new system. And one of the things that I have to do is, you know, a lot of times you get thrown into these things, you know nothing about these systems. So you got to do some research, you got to do some modeling, you got to put some things together. And I've taken a look at, you know, the documentation here, the fiscal note and the contract language, and I did a little bit of modeling, you know, based on this. We can go through that in a second. But one of the things that is most important that I do is make sure that I document like the functionality of the system, how it's supposed to work. And then what happens in the IT environment, we have developers that'll go in and they'll program, they'll create these things. And from time to time, you know, sometimes there's things that I write as a business analyst that people don't totally understand. And they'll create something called a defect. And what the defect is, it tells us that, okay, we got to look at, so what's the problem? Maybe they're not interpreting something there. We got to go back, and we got to go back and forth, and sometimes it's a very simple thing. Someone just read it, they didn't interpret it right. Sometimes we got to go back to the business. So sometimes you can just solve these things for additional communications and additional understanding. Happens every day. That's kind of a minor defect. Then you have situations where you have a major defect. What a major defect is, there's something that I didn't do my job right in uncovering something about the system. So when they went to try to program it and things like that, they couldn't do it. That's a real no-no. You don't want to do that, because then you got to take the project gets delayed, it goes back. And it's going to cost a lot of dollars to the company. You know, if you keep doing something like that, you're not going to have a job. When I look at this as a business analyst, as a professional, there are many major defects. And what I want to do is I want to point out what these defects are. And so what I did, if you look on page 58 of the contract, it's the employees, all the post-employment benefits. It goes into that. The first statement I want to touch on, it says, this is on top of page 58. Money in the OPEB trust will be invested and managed by the city in the same manner as money in the pension plans for firefighters. So my first question is, monies that are managed in the pension fund for firefighters are governed by ordinances, right? Can we all agree on that? There are specific ordinances written, right? I'm asking this to the Finance Committee. We all agree there's specific ordinances that govern how the pension plans work, right? So while I was sitting here listening to everybody, I got onto the city website and I turned to the Code of Ordinances for the pension plan. Chapter 20, it's Article 3, Chapter 20, and I went into Division 6 funding. So what I want to do is I want to read these ordinances to you, and you tell me whether this contract for the OPEB fund is going to be governed by these ordinances. The first ordinance, Section 20-131, member contributions, paragraph
Excuse
A.
me, Mr. Cushman, 1 minute. So, John, before Mr. Cushman makes these comments, he asked us a question for legal interpretation, which isn't our expertise. So I'll be deferring to you to answer that question. Go ahead, Mr. Cushman.
All right, so it's Section 20-131, member contributions under Division 6 funding. Paragraph A, Each member who is an employee will contribute 7% of his or her salary to the fund at the time of each payroll period. Such contribution shall begin at hire and shall cease when the member is no longer an employee. Now, part of that paragraph is correct, right? The OPEB trust fund will be abiding by that, right? But the part that's not correct is that they're going to be putting 2%, not a 7% contribution, correct?
The section you're reading refers to the pension, and it has the provision for what the contribution is for the people that are in that particular plan, and just cites the contribution level.
And it says,
This document that's before the council has a contribution level of 2%.
yeah, and
That section only addresses contribution level.
okay. But it says such contribution shall begin at hire and cease when the member is no longer an employee. That's the same, that provision will be used for the OPEB trust fund, right?
Well, the language in the contract says that that's going to happen,
Where does it say that in the,
because new hires are going to start paying the 2% when they get hired, and they're going to pay the 2% of salary as long as they're employed in the department.
okay. Let's look at paragraph B, pick up by city. The city shall pick up the employee's contributions required by this section, and the contributions so picked up shall be treated as employee contributions in determining tax treatment under the Internal Revenue Code. These contributions, although designated as employee contributions, will be paid by the city in lieu of contributions by the employee. Employees shall have no option to choose to receive the contributed amounts directly instead of having them paid by the city to the fund. The city shall pay these employee contributions from the same source of funds which is used in paying earnings to the employee. The city may pick up these contributions by a reduction in the cash salary of the employees, or by an offset against a future salary increase, or by a combination of a reduction in salary and offset against a future salary increase. The employee contributions which are picked up shall be treated for all purposes of this plan in the same manner and to the same extent as employee contributions made prior to the date picked up. Is that going to apply in the OPEB trust fund?
On that one, I'm going to defer to the finance people, because there was a time when I knew what pickup was when I negotiated this contract 30 years ago.
Okay.
But
No, I was just going to say, you know, I don't
applies
wanna-
to the pension,
Okay.
and it's a mechanism somehow for getting the contribution into the pension plan. The language in the contract here on the OPEB trust is very straightforward. It says there's a 2% of salary contribution from the employee into the account.
Okay. I want to keep.
It's not an actuarial fund with some of those other regulations that are in the pension fund.
And where does that say that in the contract? Where is that language in this contract that you just stated? I'm looking on page 57 and 58. Is there any other language in the contract for the OPEB trust fund? I'm on page 57 and 58. Oops, sorry, 57 and 58 of the contract. It's the red line. I guess my question is there any other pages? I haven't read the whole contract. I'm just associated with the OPEB trust fund. Is there any other language in the contract other than on page 57 and 58?
No. On the bottom of page 57, the very first sentence says, employees hired after the operative date shall contribute 2% of their base salary. That's where the 2%.
Okay.
You asked me where the 2%
No,
came from.
I get that, but that whole
It's
paragraph
2%
I
of their
read
base
about
salary.
that whole paragraph I read about pickup. Does that apply to this OPEB trust fund? That paragraph I just read, section 20-131, paragraph B, pickup by cities. Does that apply to the OPEB trust fund?
I told you I can't answer that question. I defer to the
Okay.
finance people
There's
for
a
the city.
defect, guys. All right? There's your first defect. Can't answer that question. That needs to be put in here. This top.
Bob, excuse me. So John may not be able to answer that question, but he deferred it to the finance people from the city.
Okay.
So I would like to hear the answer from one of them. And just repeat your question so they're clear on what the question is.
I'm looking at section 20-131, member contributions, paragraph B, pickup by city. I'm not going to read the whole thing again. And the reason I'm referencing all these ordinances, and I have a boatload more, I'm going to go through these one at a time, and I want to know if they apply to this OPEB trust fund, because on the top of page 58, I want to read this again. Money in the OPEB trust fund will be invested and managed by the city in the same manner as money in the pension plans for firefighters. Pretty vague statement. So I want to know, paragraph by paragraph, as I read these ordinances, does it apply or doesn't apply?
All right, let's go to your first question first. Brian, are you going to address that question?
I believe after, if passed, we'll have to make some changes. There will have to be some changes within the pension ordinance to reflect implications based on the OPEB trust.
So just repeat that. Brian, please, sorry.
I believe there will be some necessary changes to the existing pension ordinances that would be exclusive to the OPEB trust once established.
Okay, I want to go on to section 20-132, employee contributions. Effective July 1st, 1995, the city annual contributions to the fund on account of members and members as defined under section 52-31 of the Code of Ordinance is the sum of the following three components. Normal cost, net of employee contributions as determined by the actuary. I'm going to skip paragraph 2. It's something with the old pension fund. Number 3, an amount determined by the actuary which, with annual increases equal to the actuary's assumed rate of increase in base pay, will amortize over 20 years the increase or decrease in the actuarial liability after July 1st, 1995, attributed to planned amendments, changes in actuarial assumptions, and actuarial experience gains and losses affecting members and members as defined under section 52-31 of the Code of Ordinance. Does that paragraph apply to this OPEB trust fund?
No, the OPEB trust fund is a 2% of salary that's contributed to the account for the individual involved.
So there's
It's
no
not an actuarial-driven pension fund.
So there's no annual required contribution from the taxpayers, right? If you don't meet your 6.9%, there's no one that's going to indemnify and put that additional amount in, right?
Correct. It's been represented here that there's no contribution by the city
Where
into
is
that
that
account.
in the contract language? Can you point that out to me in the contract language? There's no annual required contribution?
It's not there.
I know, it's not there. That's what I'm saying. So
Well, Bob, it's not there, so there's no obligation on the city to make a contribution.
So your finance director just came up on one paragraph and told me, as a result of me coming to you, that you have to make pension ordinance changes to reflect what's on the OPEB. You're just telling me right now this is not an action, there's no annual required contribution, but there's nothing in your contract document that says that. This is the kind of thing that gets us into trouble, right? And people don't understand, or you have to go back and do a side agreement to put the language. Why isn't that language in here?
I'm not sure why you're asking me. I didn't negotiate the contract.
I
I'm
know,
here
I'm not-
advising,
John, I'm not-
answering questions for the council
One at a
people.
time.
The administration brought the document
Here's
forward.
what I want to do. I
Bob,
don't-
excuse me. Whoa. One at a time. Take a breath.
Okay.
One at a time.
All right, here's what I'm
John
saying.
Harrington is speaking. I want to hear his answer.
I don't want to go back
No,
and forth.
stop. I want to hear his answer. John, I didn't hear what your last statement was.
Well, he was arguing with me why something wasn't in the document, and what my response to him was, I didn't draft the document. The document is put forward here by the administration. I give advice to the council members and answer their questions.
Okay.
So you're asking me to defend what is or isn't in that document.
So, John, so we acknowledge that there's no language in the contract saying that the taxpayers will not have to contribute to that 2% OPEB account, correct?
What's in the document only requires a contribution from the new hires.
Okay.
From the employees.
So should that contract or this contract have that language in it, in your legal opinion?
Without it, the only money going into the fund is coming from the employee. I don't necessarily think you need it.
Okay.
Sounds like you have conflicting language, though, and I'm going to go on because I think there's other things that conflict with this. But so, in a normal pension fund,
I'll make one observation, okay? The language talks about, what page was it on again?
58.
Now I lost the page. See, trying to talk and keep track of the paper. That first line talks about investment. In the sections you're reading, there are other sections of the shall contribute, the employee's contribution, shall contribute 2%. Says money in the OPEB trust will be invested and managed by the city in the same manner. That's the paragraph you've been focused on, right?
Yes.
Okay. The sections of the ordinance that you're in talks about contributions and stuff. There's a whole other part of the Code of Ordinances. They're not in section Article 20. They're in another section that talks about investment and how funds are to be invested and managed.
okay, so with respect to that, I'm going to jump a little bit ahead. I didn't want to do this. Section, it's called Division 7, Plan Administration. Section 20-136, Responsibilities of the Treasurer. And I might go back to the other ordinance. The city treasurer shall be the custodian of the fund, and he or she is hereby authorized and directed to do the following. 1, deposit contributions in the fund according with Division 6. We were just in Division 6. So the ordinance basically says that the treasurer, we all can agree, right? As a result of this, the OPEB plan is going to be depositing and managing money in accordance with the pension plan for the firefighters. This section basically tells you right here that the treasurer is going to be the custodian of the fund, and number 1 says deposit contribution in the fund in accordance with Division 6. So I was in Division 6. So everything I'm reading in Division 6 is saying that's what the treasurer should do in Division 7. So everything that I'm saying is relevant to what either should or shouldn't be in this contract.
Is that a question?
It's a question.
Okay.
It's a big defect. So you know, your city council just said that section doesn't apply, but the section I just read says refer to that section, and that's part of the treasurer's responsibilities. So I could go through all these. I have a number of ordinances that talk about all these different things, and I want to go through them. I think this is important. I don't care if we have to stay here till 10 o'clock.
I'll answer the question again, okay, for the third
I
time.
guarantee you 10.
The language in the proposed contract, the 2 words that are there, says the funds will be invested and managed. There are provisions in the Code of Ordinances, not in Article 20, not in any division of Article 20, about the investment of funds and management of funds. They're not in that section.
It says invested and managed by the city in the same manner as pension plan. You know? So you got conflicting language in here. So what's the next one I want to go to? All right, here's one. This is section 20-132, paragraph C. City contributions will be paid throughout the fiscal year in 24 equal installments with each payroll period. Does that apply to the OPEB trust fund? Let me read it again. City contributions will be paid throughout the fiscal year in 24 equal installments with each payroll period. Does that apply to this OPEB trust fund?
No, because there's no city contributions.
So then when is the money going to go in? Where in this ordinance does it tell you when the money goes in? Once a month, once a year? When?
The language in the contract says that the contribution from the employee will be 2% of his base salary.
So you're going to do it once,
If you let me finish, the salaries are paid on a regular basis. The 2% will be deducted like taxes are deducted.
so you're going to assume that, right? But we have a specific pension ordinance that tells you when the payroll schedule is, right? But we don't have anything written in this contract or an ordinance that tells you what the payroll contribution schedule is, right? Can we all agree on that? There's nothing in here that says what the contribution schedule is to put into the OPEB trust fund, right? Can we agree on that? Can I get an answer from somebody?
I don't see it.
All right, it's not there. But we have it in our
What I
pension.
do see, excuse me, Bob, what I do see is shall contribute 2% of their base salary in the amount set forth in the salary chart in Article 11, Section 1,
That could be once a year.
to the OPEB trust
I'm
fund.
going to tell you one thing. I work for my company. Thank God I get a bi-weekly paycheck and I get a match. There's a big difference in putting money in one time a year or putting it in 26 times a year because you can earn more interest in your trust fund. I would think the firefighters would want this to follow the same schedule as their pension, right? I would think so. That's just an assumption I'm making. So you have a vague, no language in here that talks about when the money should be deposited.
So, excuse me, Brian, to the mic, please. So, I'm not sure if you're the one to answer the question or someone else. So, what is the intent of the city with regards to the 2% of their base salary? Shall contribute 2% of their base salary. Is that you or is that Mike or who wants to answer the question?
I'm sorry, since Brian was not at the negotiating table, it's probably better for me to answer what the intent was.
Okay, good. Thank you, Brian.
The intent was that 2% of the pay, each pay period, and therefore the money would be invested each pay period. However, I will note that we intentionally did not prescribe in the contract how that would happen so that we could leave it to the city council and the management of the city to do it in the most cost-effective manner of the city. So if, for instance, a year from now you decide to pay people monthly because it's cheaper to do that, you can contribute this money monthly. If you decide to pay people weekly, you can contribute it weekly. But that is something that the council can set by ordinance. Just like it did with the pension, it's set by ordinance how often. We did not leave it to the fire union to dictate to management or the council how often that money needed to be contributed. The less you put in a contract, the more flexibility as management that you have. And I'll defer to the attorneys on that. But generally speaking, anything that's silent in a contract is our option how we want to do that. So as far as that's concerned, the understanding at the table was it would get contributed with each pay period. That's certainly why it was written that way. And then it's up to the city then to write procedures and policies and, if necessary, an ordinance to reflect the specifics. But I don't think the specifics belong in a contract. We don't have specifics in the contract that are reflected in the ordinance about how the pension works.
But no, Bob, wait a minute.
The city could if it so chose. The city
So, I don't want conversations among each of you up there and conversations with the folks in the audience, et cetera, et cetera. There's one person at the time at the mic. So, Michael, you are saying, and I'm hearing, different things. At one point, we're saying whatever's in this contract can't be changed by city council. And then we're saying this is like an exception to that, so we left that, again, ambiguous. So what you're saying is that after, let's assume that this contract is approved, or when a contract of some sort is approved, that this work is going to be left up to the city council. And how do you propose on having that happen? Because I think the point is clear that it says 2% of the base salary. I think it is important to know, is this weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly? I think that's important. Maybe some other folks don't. But now that it's brought up, I think it is. And what you're saying is that homework is being left up to us here on the city council to determine. So at what time frame are we supposed to do it? And until such time frame that we do it, is this something that is going to take place? Will this 2% be deducted out of the firefighter's salary? Be deducted when? Are you going to deduct it weekly and put it in a bank? How is it going to be managed? Will this have interest for them? Or are we not going to deduct it, and then in 3 months from now, or 3 weeks from now, or 6 months from now, we say to the firefighters, okay, the council, did their thing, and they're now saying it's got to be done weekly. We haven't done anything for whatever period of time. We're hitting you with this all at once. I need that clarification. I think that is a reasonable question to ask, don't you?
So if I could take your
Sure.
questions in order. The first thing you said was, we were told earlier we couldn't make changes, and now you're telling us we can. And I think what we have said is, if something's in the contract, you can't change it. Therefore, it's to the benefit of the administration and the council to only put in the contract the things that are absolutely necessary to be there. It is not necessary to put in a contract the exact mechanics of how that money is deducted and invested. It is important that once the contract is ratified, that the city develop a policy. And again, I only say the council because I'm not a lawyer and I'm not familiar with Warwick City Charter. In other places I have worked, it would just be a policy. Someone would write a policy for how that money got deducted and invested. Here in Warwick, perhaps it's an ordinance. An attorney would know much better. But I am saying that we did not want it prescribed in a contract, because if someone wants to change it years from now, they could do that without having to go back and negotiate it. If we put it in the contract, then we're back to the problem we talked about earlier, where now you can't change it by ordinance if you so desire. So that's
I can
why,
understand that,
That's
Mike.
why we left
I
it
can
out.
understand the thought process of that. Tim, would you come to the mic, please? So what is the intent here? You were at the table, I believe, right?
Yes.
So Mike is saying he's not sure whether it's the city council that's going to do this policy procedure thing, or is this a procedural act on the administration? He's not sure. What are we supposed to do?
Well,
What is it?
City council certainly enacts ordinances,
Okay.
and presumably it would be an ordinance that would fill in these gaps, so to speak. So this, if I could just take a moment to say, this larger issue, and this is the very important thing, we referred to the management rights clause that was put in for the first time. What that management rights clause essentially says is, unless this document prevents you from doing it, city, you have the right to run the department. You have the right to run your enterprise, the Warwick Fire Department. These things that we're talking about here are running the enterprise. If it's not addressed in the document, in the contract, and you're not prohibited from doing it, you can do it.
Tim, I understand that. That was explained. I understand it. It brings me back to my question. What happens to the firefighters on the 2%? Until such time as we ratify this thing, or I'm saying, back up, assuming that the contract is ratified, until such time as this city council passes an ordinance, my question is, I want to know what's going to happen to their money. I want to know, is the city going to be deducting 2% out of their salary every week? If the answer to that question is yes, where is it going to go? If we don't enact whatever is necessary to mandate, whether this be weekly, biweekly, monthly, etc., where is the money sitting, and are they going to be getting any interest? Or are we not going to withdraw or deduct 2% from the firefighters' pay until such time as we pass an ordinance? That's all I want. That's all I want to know.
Well, the easiest answer is no money's going to be deducted upon the ratification of this agreement, because the money gets deducted only from new hires. So there's no money
Right.
to deduct until
Okay.
you hire new firefighters.
Okay. So until such time as we put in this ordinance, if you have new hires prior, there's no money that's going to be deducted until we get the ordinance done.
No, if you hired new firefighters prior to the ordinance, yes,
Okay.
you'd be deducting the 2%.
Okay.
And in the absence of an ordinance, it would be at the discretion of the treasurer and the finance director.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm kind of shocked what I just heard here, because it's kind of like these guys want it both ways. I mean, determining when you withdraw money from someone's paycheck and deposit either in a pension or an OPEB account, there's major financial implications. You guys want to save money, you know what, take everything out once a year. And you missed the entire 2019 where the stock market boomed, right? How much money would that cost these firefighters, right? So what they basically just told you, and I read this thing about, you can't pass certain ordinances because they're not in the contract, but now they're telling you, you can pass an ordinance to say when to take their funds out, right? You could do it once a year, which is to the city's advantage, but it's their money and you're screwing them. And they're telling you could do that. That's I can't believe I just heard that. So what's the definition of what you can do and what you can't do? There's financial implications to these ordinances, right? When you decide when to take out this money, and here's another one too. Say you pass this ordinance, it's not in this contract. 2 years from now or a year from now, we hire a firefighter class. They want to grieve it now because they're pissed off because you're taking the money once a month instead of according to the way the pensions work. You're back to the same situation you got with the other thing, right? You passed ordinances first, right? That said tier 2 pension people, right? Wasn't put in the contract. You got grieved and you lost it. They're telling you to do the same thing. Pass the ordinance, right? We'll hire these guys. They're not hired yet, right? Then they get hired and say, well, you're getting screwed here because the money, it's a different policy than what the pension plan says. They take you to arbitration and you lose and you're back all the way again. So what they just told you, to me, I'm a logical guy. Totally inconsistent. Totally inconsistent. So that's all I'm saying. I don't know if anybody has an answer to that. Does anybody have an answer to that? What you just told them to do? Isn't that the same situation that got them into the arbitration where they lost? So I want someone to answer that. I want a legal representative to answer that. Isn't that the same thing that this council did back in 2011? They passed an ordinance that says no hirees after 2012 were in tier 2, right? That's what you did. We hired the firefighters. It was not negotiated in the contract. They grieved it. You lost the arbitration. They're telling you to do the same thing with this payment that has financial implications, right? Do you all agree with that?
John, I'm not going to tell you whether I agree or not. I'm not a lawyer. John, could you weigh in on that, please?
Can you repeat the question?
All right. I'm going to try to take this slow. I get excited. And I want to say what the legal representation just was made to this council. They said to pass the ordinance. I want to make sure I'm correct. Pass the ordinance and set the policy with the withdrawal of the funds based on how they want to manage it, right? So they said you could do it by the pension ordinance. You could do it once a month. You could do it once a year. You could do whatever you want. That's what they said, right? Right? I see you nodding, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And do you agree by making the withdrawals at different points in time, there's a financial implication to that?
I agree with that.
Okay. And do you agree that the situation, let me walk through this, in 2011, pension ordinances were passed that said any firefighter who was hired after a certain date in 2012 was a tier 2 employee for pensions and for health care benefits, right?
I'm familiar with that.
And then we never negotiated it in the contract for whatever reason, the administration. And we hired firefighters after that, right?
That's correct.
And they grieved it, they went to arbitration, and they won. And now as a result of that, we're pushing them from tier 2 back to tier 1, right? All right.
That's the proposal.
So follow me. A couple months from now, we haven't hired any new firefighters.
I really don't want to do that, but go ahead.
Council passes an ordinance that's financially beneficial to the city that says when these new firefighters come in, we're not going to follow the pension plan because we don't want to. We're going to withdraw at December 31st for their entire monies that they want to put into the OPEB trust fund. Say they pass that. These guys come in and they grieve it and say, we never negotiated that in the contract. Isn't that the same situation you got into with the Tier 1, Tier 2?
No.
Because it wasn't in the contract?
No,
Why not?
because one was a substantive impact on pension benefits. And here is the methodology of collecting the payment that is clearly 2% of salary. You're not going to agree with me, but at least let me finish the answer, okay? So the methodology of collecting it is 2% of salary. The city would be foolish and stupid not to collect the 2% in every pay period. By letting it go till the end of the year, there's not enough money in the salary to collect the 2%.
You don't understand what I'm saying.
No,
And-
Bob, let him finish.
And the city gets the benefit of having the 2% and being able to do the investment to increase the account so that in the long term there may be additional funds in the account. So for all of those reasons, it would be foolish not to collect the 2% in every pay period.
I know, but they don't have to. They could take the money
It's
and
not
put
a
it, they
question-
could put it in their savings account somewhere and earn interest and deposit on December 31st, right? That's the policy they
Okay.
want to set.
Bob, we agree that,
all right.
it doesn't specifically
All right,
state
I want to
it.
go on. I just want to
So
go
we
on to
made the
something else.
point.
But you know what? You got a lot of problems with this because this language on the first sentence on page 58 basically says money in the OPEB trust fund will be invested and managed in the city in the same manner as money in the pension plan for firefighters. That's not what's going on here. So you got some issues. So let me go to the other thing that I wanted to do. So I want to give you, Councilman, credit for trying to go through this OPEB trust fund thing. But let me first, I just want to talk about something for a second, digress a little bit. I came before this council 5 years ago. I did a famous presentation, caused a lot of outrage from some people. And I talked about the escalating legacy cost. And I talked about back in 2004, 19% of the budget was associated with legacy cost. And I talked about how we need to make fundamental changes. We can't afford this anymore. You fast forward now, 2019, over 30% of your budget is allocated towards legacy costs. And for the council members who weren't here when I was on the council in 2007, it's been devastating for the programs and services we used to have. We used to have after-school programs. There was a lot of services in the city that we no longer have. Talk to the school department. They've been level funded for so many years. Our infrastructure's falling apart. So, when we talk about these benefits, we have to talk about what's the overall cost. We got a one-page fiscal note here that says it's a 30% savings. Nobody did the modeling and did the math to figure out what's the cost. What's the cost of lifetime health care for one person on this plan? I've done it. I'm going to tell you in a second what I came up with. But this is what I want to talk about. Years ago, over 20 years ago, lifetime health care was only for municipal employees. Why was that? The reason why it was because supposedly they got reduced wages, and what the city did is they negotiated contracts to make up, and they gave them lifetime health care. Health care was $2,000 for a family plan back then. No one cared. It's $20-something thousand now, right? What did Mayor Avedisian do 20 years ago, about 20 years ago? He gave lifetime health care to the police and the firefighters. There was no contract ratification back then, so the council had no say back then. I got to give credit. I think it's the lasting legacy of Mayor Solomon. He had the foresight to have ratification powers for the council. The other thing that Mayor Avedisian never did, he never did an actuarial study. He never did a study to find out how much was this going to cost. And here's a question I say. If that council had a crystal ball, or the mayor had a crystal ball, and they knew today what was going to happen then, would they have given lifetime health care? And what happened? We have $400 million in unfunded liabilities. We spend over $10 million a year for retiree health care. No copay, caps on prescription drugs. I saw an elderly gentleman over here that is basically getting taxed out of his house. $600 tax increase this year. He's on a fixed income. He's a disabled vet. He's going to be seeing more of these, it's sad to say. So all I'm saying is now, you are creating you're making a generational decision here. What's the generational decision? You're setting up an OPEB trust fund. So my question is, what's the cost of this going to be in 20 to 30 years? You can get that answer. You can have an actuary who'll do it for you. You know, I don't think, there's a famous quote. I don't think I would blow my nose on this sheet of paper here. It's not worth it. But you can find out that answer. Don't you think you should find that answer? Don't you think we should be asking the question, can we afford to be giving lifetime health care? Let me ask a question. When these firefighters retire in 30 years from now, is there going to be any, other than the OPEB trust fund, let's discount that, is there anything written into this contract that applies the same co-pays that active employees are paying? I see the council president shaking his head no. So basically, other than the OPEB trust fund, it's the same health care plan as the active employees with no co-pays. It's the OPEB trust fund that's going to save 30%, and then it went up to 33% tonight. Mr. DePasquale added 3% more. So, here's what I did. And this is something I do every single day in work. We create models. We create process flows. And this isn't hard to do. I shouldn't say that. I apologize. You know, if you're not used to using spreadsheets and working with numbers, it could get very confusing. This one-page fiscal now is a model for the new system that you're building. And they give you all the stuff you need to plug into a spreadsheet to create the equations. 6.9% investment return, 3% salary increase, current estimated single premium $800 a month, healthcare inflation 6% per year, projected premium $4,595. And by the way, that's $55,138 a year, 30 years from now for a health care plan. But if you take, this is simple math, and this is what I did. If you take $800, and that's what it's saying per month, $800 per month, you multiply that by 12, it's $9,600 today, right, for single plan health care. Based on this document, the firefighter is going to work 30 years. If you compound $9,600, if you compound $800, 6% over 30 years, guess what you come up with? $4,595 a month. So it's very easy to do this stuff. So here's what I did. I took a spreadsheet. I'm going to give you guys this information because at least I'm going to provide you with some math. I think you need some math here. You know, when I was in college, the professor always said, show your work, right? You don't just come up with an answer, you know? And I think sometimes, you know, they wanted to make sure you weren't looking at your buddy next door to you to get the answer.
Bob, just
all right.
Stick to the facts.
All right, so here's what I did. Firefighter current average salary, $72,800. That's what they're saying right now from that document. They're going to be getting that salary for starting salary in year one, 2020. You multiply that by 2%, and you get $1,456. Right? That's the first amount of money that's going to go into the OPEB trust fund. The next year, they're getting a 3% raise. Their base salary goes up to $74,984. Now, they got $1,456 in the account. That's getting a 6.9% rate of return. So you multiply that by 6.9%, and you're getting an extra $100, and then you're also putting in $1,500, which is the 2% of the increased salary. You keep doing that for 10 years, right? And at that point in time, your OPEB trust fund with your investments is up to $22,000 after 10 years. In the 11th year, they're getting promoted to a lieutenant. Now, in this document, it says the lieutenant's salary is $89,000. You can't go by that. You got to compound that $89,000 by 3% for the 10 years he's already working. So by the time he's into year 11, the lieutenant's starting salary is $119,609. That's what you take the 2% contribution out. When you take that 2% contribution, he's putting $2,392 in. You do that for 10 more years, you do the 6.9% compounding. At the end of his 20th year, this is now in 2039, he's 44 years old. His OPEB trust fund has $81,117 in it. Now he gets promoted, just like this says, over a 10-year period to a captain. That starting salary back in 2020 was $98,000. You need to compound that for 20 years at 3%. When you do that, his starting salary in 2040 is $176,999. You take 2% out of that and you get $5,597. People are laughing. This isn't my model. This is that maybe you should be laughing because this is from this document here. Yeah, and I don't think it's right. And actually, believe it or not, the higher the salary is, the more your OPEB trust fund's going to have. So when you do that, by the time you get to 54 years old, after 30 years of work, he's put in about $84,697. When you tack on the investment returns of $128,297, his OPEB trust fund is at $212,994. That's what it stands for his entire career.
Bob, excuse me 1 minute. Councilman Howe has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did you just do your numbers on an assumption of a 3% raise every year?
That's what it says, 3% salary increases. It's according to this document. Look at your document.
No, I understand. I wanted to clarify
Yes.
that was in your
Yes.
numbers. Okay, thank you.
Yes. So we're standing at $212,994. If we go to page 58 of the contractual language, let's see. So what's going to happen? I'm going to read this. The number of years of life expectancy. No, wait a minute. Okay, let me back up for a second. It's the third bullet point. Upon retirement, an actuarial determination will be made regarding the life expectancy of a retiring employee. So they're going to have an actuarial come in and say, in 2049, with the firefighter turning his 55th year of age, how long is he going to live? So one thing that this document doesn't have is it doesn't have what the life expectancy. So I ran two models. I ran it 25 years old, that he will live 25 years into his 80th birthday, and I plugged it into this model. Now, I think Ken Block talked about this. If you look at the next paragraph, it says, the number of years of life expectancy will be divided into the monies in the retiring employee's account, with the quotient being the allocation of the employee's funds to be used to pay for a portion of the retiree's health care benefit, and the city shall be responsible for the balance of those payments. So what we're doing is we're assuming 25 years he's going to live. We're taking the $212,994, we're dividing it by 25. The amount that's going to come out of that OPEB trust fund every single year is $8,520 for the next 25 years. It's fixed. So by itself, let's think about this for a second. The Warwick teachers signed a contract 3 years ago. They had a 20% copay. The premiums, it was fixed. It was a fixed 20% copay. Healthcare costs have exploded in the last 3 years in the school department. What's happened because the amount of money taken out of their checks has been fixed for 3 years? They're paying a 13% copay.
Bob, just
All right. So, but what I'm
stick to this
saying,
contract here, okay?
listen, the example is if you're fixing the amount of money that's going to come out of the fund, the average is going to be off. So what I did is I took the $8,520. By the time they retire in 2050, it says in this document right here, the monthly cost is going to be $4,595 a month. If you take that, that's $55,000 a year. The firefighter is going to take $8,520 out of the OPEB trust fund and pay for that. That's 15.5%. The other rest of the money, $46,618, 84.5%, is going to come out of the city funds. When you do that until the time of 80 years old, here's what you get. The city is, the total cost of the health care, which is nowhere on this document, is $1,835,704. $1.8 million in health care costs. The city's going to pay $1,622,710, 88.4%. The rest of the money, about 11.6%, is going to come out of the OPEB trust fund. It's nowhere near 30, and I ran it the other way with a 50, and I'll tell you that in a second. So I'm going to give you all this information. When you chart this thing, when you chart it, because the amount coming out of the OPEB trust fund is constant, and the healthcare premium is going higher and higher, I'm just going to read some of these percentages. At 55 years old, these are rounded numbers, the city pays 85%, the healthcare, the OPEB pays 15%. By the time he hits 64 years old, because the premiums keep going up and their fund is just taking out the $8,520, the city's contribution is up to 91%. The OPEB trust fund is 9%. Now, when they hit 65, they go into Medicare. So you take the Medicare premiums and you multiply the cost escalation by 6% over the next 30, 40 years. The contribution of the OPEB trust fund actually goes higher because the premiums have dropped. The premiums have dropped from $93,000 a year to $47,000 a year. So what happens when they hit 65, the OPEB trust fund is paying 18% now, and the city's paying 82%. And if you continue to do those calculations to the 80th year of age, it's up to a 92% contribution for the city and an 8% contribution for the employer's OPEB fund. So you never get close to 30. And so I'm going to go over another example in a second. But let me give you this example too, because I had to write this down on a piece of paper because I want to make this so everybody can understand this. And this was very easy. If I put $100 on that table right now, and you told me, you know, for the next 4 days, I got to pay you $5, but I'm going to earn 6.9% on, you know, that $100. So the first day, I give you $5, I got $95. But I'm making $6.56 in interest. So my fund is now up to $101.56. Next day, I give you $5 more. My account's down to $96.56. But I just made $6.66 in interest. Now my account's up to $103.22. I do it again on the third day. It's down to $98.22. I just made $6.77 in interest. I'm up to $105. I give you the $5 on the fourth day. I'm down to $100. I just made 6.9%. I'm up to $106.90. The reason I'm giving you this example is in this model, and this is their model now. This is from their numbers, not mine. You are taking out of that OPEB trust fund, we said, $212,000 divided by 25. You're taking out every single year $8,520. In the meantime, you're earning a 6.9% interest rate on what's in the OPEB trust fund. So in the first year they retire, they started with $212,994. By the end of the first year, they got $218,000. So then they're making more money because you're taking out a fixed amount and the interest is accruing. By the time you get to their 80th year of age, the 25th year, that OPEB trust account's worth $561,456. This is their model, not mine. Maybe someone's got to check the math on it. But I want to go back and read the contractual language. It says, this is the last paragraph on page 58. If a retired employee should die prior to the funds in his account being fully utilized to pay for his share of the health care benefit under this agreement, then those funds shall be payable to the retiree's estate. So based on this contract and based on this model, we're going to write a check out to the firefighter's estate of $561,456. I'm going to withdraw it right from this fund. That's what's going to happen, based on their model. I would like to call up Allstate and say I've been good for the last 30 years on my house. Can you write me a check because I haven't taken anything out? But, you know, I think the purpose of a trust fund is not to do something like this. This really has to be questioned. So this is the example that I had based on a model with 25 years. Now, in the contract, there's a model that has 15 years, right? And I would think that the contract was signed before the fiscal note was developed, so they weren't able to do the math. I ran through the same exact exercise in my model using a 15-year mortality. And here's what the results are. The total health care cost is $995,327. The taxpayers are paying 78.6% of that cost, and the firefighters' OPEB trust fund 23.4%. The remaining funds in the OPEB account at the 70th year of age, because they're only living for 15 years, is $200,955 that will go to the firefighter's estate. So I'm going to give you this information, but I think you've got a big problem here. And I ran this model at 15 years mortality, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, all the way up to 25 years old. You never hit a 30% average. The only time you actually do hit, and let me go back for a second, a 30%, is when you run the 15-year mortality model. When the firefighter turns 65 years of age, that's the 1 year the OPEB trust fund pays 30%. That's it. But then it starts going down. By the time you get to the 70th year, 69th year, it's down to 24, because remember, it's only logical. The amount that you're taking out is fixed. The premiums are going up. So there's no way I can see where someone gets a 30%. Now, there could be something in this study that I'm missing, but I'm just looking at it. And the fact that the administration has hired experts and they don't run the numbers, shame on them. So this thing says, for a typical firefighter, these contributions are projected to offset gross retiree health care costs by an average of about 30% per year. I can't find where it's true. And I think somebody needs to prove this to you before you ratify this contract. One final point. I wanted to find out what percentage of a firefighter's salary would have to be withdrawn to get you to 30%. And I could give you the spreadsheet, and I should be charging you thousands of dollars for it, but I won't. But if you put the firefighter's contribution at 5.15%, that gets you to 30% savings based on the 25-year mortality table. So they're saying 2% here. When I plug it in, and the 15-year to me is totally unrealistic. If you probably look at anything, they're going to tell you a 55-year-old man is going to live longer than 15 years. So it's more than double the contribution that has to go in order to get the 30% savings. Let me just, before I wrap up, I just want to make sure I don't miss anything in my notes. Let's see. Yeah, I think the final, I think there was a $250,000 budgeted line item for a firefighter study. Was anything ever done or provided to the council? No?
I don't know.
No, but there was one budgeted, right? You guys budgeted $250,000 the last budget year, right? Did you get any report? No?
I don't recall getting a report.
Okay. Yeah, I think the final comment I want to make is, we got the school department over here looking for $40 million for a bond to fix the schools. We're talking about potentially bonding out tens of millions of dollars to build a new school. The decision that you make tonight is going to have an effect on whether you can do that. The last card this administration has in its deck is the ability to borrow. Because, when your consultant came in about your 5-year projection, what did he tell you? We got $240,000 on our credit card, right? But the credit agencies don't look at that. So we're looking good. And he even said that you could probably borrow up to $200 million. The question is, if you do that, are you just kicking the can down the road to another set of council people and another mayor, and you're going to put this city into bankruptcy some year? I don't want to see 20 years from now that a council's going to be sitting here and there's going to be a mayor in the front office saying, what the hell did those guys do? They passed a contract that they had no idea how much it cost. They have a one-page fiscal note that has basically nothing in it, that tells you nothing. There's a 30% cost savings that the administration can't prove. You got contractual language here that says, follow pension ordinances, and then when we go through the pension ordinances, oh no, that doesn't apply. Oh, we need to add an ordinance. Is that the way to do things? Is that the way to do business? If I did something like that in my job, I'd be fired, because the defects would be piling up. And my managers would take a look at that, and you know what, Bob, you're not doing a good job. So all I'm asking you to do your homework. One other thing. We know that Tier 2 employees are going back to Tier 1, right, for pensions and health care. Can someone tell me the difference, because I'm on health care, what's the difference in benefits between Tier 2 and Tier 1 for health care?
I don't have the answer for that.
Does someone have the
Brian
answer?
or Mike? Repeat the question.
I want to know, if you ratify this contract, the Tier 2 employees hired, I think, after 2012 and after 2014 are going to be moved into the Tier 1 plan for pensions. You got an actual report for that, right? That tells you the cost, right? I want to know the difference in benefits from Tier 2 employees that are being moved to Tier 1. I want someone to just give me a synopsis. What's the difference?
Does anyone have that?
This is amazing.
Bob?
This- oh, this is unbelievable. I know the answer, by the way.
Sir, please, state your name for the record again, please.
Joseph Penza, the attorney for the firefighters union. Are you talking about
Mr.
healthcare
Penza, could you
benefits?
speak right into the mic, please?
Okay, are
Speak
you talking
directly
about
into the
healthcare
mic.
benefits? There is no difference. Healthcare is not addressed in the pension ordinance. It's not addressed. It's not in Tier 1 and Tier 2.
Can I ask another question? Is the spouse of the firefighter going to get the lifetime health care benefits under this contract that were originally in Tier 2? That's the question. I don't know.
Mike?
No, the lifetime health care is single only, not for the spouse.
Okay, so, Mike, stay at the mic, please. So what you're saying is, if this contract is ratified, if the appeal doesn't go through and everything plays out the way it's been proposed, that the firefighters who go into Tier 1 from Tier 2 will not be receiving family lifetime health care.
What I'm saying is, because I just want to make sure I got your question correct.
Was that the question?
Everybody in Tier 2 is single and not family.
Correct.
And
But if
you
they move,
give me a
if they
second,
move
I am-
back
I
into
am-
Tier 1, will that put them to lifetime family health care? That's the question.
No, that is not. They do not get lifetime family health care. That's not based on Tier 1 versus Tier 2. And if I'm wrong, someone please correct me. But it's my understanding that it's based on the date of hire. And at some point many years ago, any new hire after this date, many years ago, family health care was taken away from them in retirement.
Yeah, I believe
and it
that
had
was like
nothing to do with Tier 1
2008 or
and 2.
something.
Yeah, and it had nothing to do with Tier 1 and Tier 2. So, no, those employees that are part of the Tier 1, Tier 2 arbitration, it has no effect on their spouse getting health care in retirement.
John, I'm hearing some chatter back there. Did you want to weigh in on this?
I'm trying to find the correct piece of paper, but my belief is that first of all, you have to separate pension benefit from health insurance benefits. Because people move around they're separate anyhow. The benefits are separate. The health insurance for retirees in the Fire 2 contract, whether they're in Tier 1 or Tier 2, I believe is single coverage until they reach age 65, and then they get the Medicare supplement plan.
So let me ask you a question. So we never had Tier 1, 2. We had Police 1, Fire 1, then we had Police 2 before 2012, right?
Say that again. There's a Police 1 and Fire 1. There's a Fire 2 pension plan
Yep.
that has 2 tiers.
Okay, so...
and it's a pension plan.
All right, that's
It's got
pension.
nothing to do with
So-
health
so I'm-
insurance.
So maybe I'm getting confused, but wasn't there something in the contract for the firefighters who were hired before 2012 had husband and wife lifetime health care when they retired?
I believe that was the firefighters covered by Fire One pension, hired because they were hired prior to that date.
You said you believe. We need to know an answer. You're
Well,
talk-
if you give me time, I'll get an answer.
okay.
If we had these questions ahead of time, well, Bob, it's late at night. You come to the microphone, you ask questions, and you expect us to go through all of this and come up with the answer.
John, I'm sorry. I apologize if I gave that impression.
You give me enough time,
The
I'll get you the
administration
answer.
should be able to answer that. There's no excuse here. We have a contract here that you're setting to ratify. You should know, is there any implication? All right, I said
Bob,
the question wrong. Wait a
I
minute,
think there's two gentlemen behind you that will speak to that.
So I'll reiterate, the answer is no. There is no impact from that arbitration on what a retiree will get in terms of health care in their retirement. There is no impact. There is no such thing as Tier 1 and Tier 2 for health care. As the solicitor pointed out, it's a pension ordinance only. I will also note that in the prior contract, and it's in this one only because it's not redlined and it's not stricken, so it continues. This is not from this contract. This is the prior contract that was ratified. All employees hired on or after July 1, 2015, upon their retirement from service, either as a normal or non-job-related disability retirement, the city shall provide only single coverage health insurance. So that covers all of the people that were part of that. That again, the Tier 1, Tier 2 had nothing to do with health care. It was strictly related to pension.
Tim?
That's absolutely correct. That's correct. It's
Okay.
July 1st, 2015, single coverage in retirement. Nothing to
That's
do-
hired after July 2015.
hired after July 1st, 2015, nothing to do with the pension.
So the arbitration ruling has nothing to do with the health care benefits? Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
I know it's late. I'm going to make a few quick points with respect to matters that have been brought up, and I'll work in reverse order. With respect to the OPEB trust, I think one of the main things you have to realize is that this is at least a foot in the door to reduce the back healthcare expenses that are going forward. I can tell you, based on my years of experience, that unless this is negotiated into a contract, an arbitrator is not going to give it to you. So the firefighters here came forward in an attempt to assist the city, stood up to the plate and said, we will address this. And now that, if it's passed, I'm sure the next thing that the city was going to do is go to the police union and the municipal union and try to get the same concessions. But unless it's agreed upon, very seldom will an arbitrator touch any pension benefits. Secondly, with respect to the OPEB trust, it is governed by Internal Revenue Law, the Internal Revenue Code, so that there are certain things that are going to have to be in the trust itself. What is intended to set forth in the contract is that in addition to the mandates of the federal law, these are the other provisions the parties agreed. It may very well be, and I'm not an OPEB trust expert, that the OPEB trust by law may require that deductions be made for each pay period and deposited into the OPEB trust for each pay period. And finally, with respect to the OPEB trust, that general language is invested and managed. It's not intended to mirror the pension. It's a different animal altogether. But the pension funds are invested by your administrator. It will be done the same way, presumably. It's managed. They'll present reports to you every quarterly or however frequently it is done. That's the investment and management aspect of it, not that it's supposed to mirror the pension ordinance. On the question of substitutions, it was implied that maybe the city is getting beat for money because somebody may have 27 days that they swapped out and they walked out the door with those 27 days, that has no impact on the city. That's between the two firefighters. So if somebody walks out the door with 27 days that they didn't pay back, they just shortchange their fellow firefighter. They take care of that themselves. There's never a problem with that. Very sensitive issue, and I know it's always been tossed about for the last year and a half, so I'll bring it up, the so-called side agreements. Typically, when there is a dispute over a contract provision, there's one of two ways to resolve it. You go to arbitration and let the arbitrator decide, or you attempt to resolve it by negotiating with the parties. And with respect to this particular provision that dealt with the payment of sick days, the contract language was in fact unclear. And so in an effort, and the city was going to act one way, and the union said, no, that's not the right way. So there was going to be a grievance filed. But instead of filing a grievance, the parties came to an agreement, and they entered into a memorandum of agreement, which is a resolution of an arbitration and a grievance dispute. So that happens every day of the week. Now, how the memorandum of understanding was interpreted ended up being a big dispute, but there was nothing like nefarious about this. It was a resolution of a potential grievance, and that's how we got to where the resolution was resolved by a memorandum of agreement, and that led to other problems. But there was nothing that anyone tried to sneak something by someone, particularly the council. And finally, on that same issue, with respect to the 2012, 2015, and 2015, 2018, neither myself, Mr. Augusta, or Mr. Bliss were here when that contract was approved by the council. And I understand, I've never done it this way, but you would get a memorandum with all the key bullet points, and then the parties would go back and write the contract. That's why it took 6 months sometimes between the time the council, quote unquote, approved the contract and the final contract was signed. The problem is that there was never anything, at least from what I could see, and I just got into this when I was engaged by the Firefighters Union to represent them in the grievance. And then I started gathering documents because I was concerned that maybe it was an oversight, maybe that it was in the TA that was presented to the council and approved. If you look at those TAs or the memorandum that was submitted by the solicitor and look at all the bullet points, you will not find anything related to the fact that Tier 2 was going to be incorporated into the collective bargaining agreement, nor did you see anything where the benefits or the reduced benefits from Tier 2 were in their way to the contract. So when the document was presented to the council, there was nothing about Tier 2 in both contracts. Now, I don't know what was represented to the council at that time by the solicitor, but all I can tell you is the written documents don't have anything. I misspoke. The 2015, 2018 proposals or the approvals that the city council made did mention Tier 2, only with respect to the contribution, nothing with respect to the reduction in benefits. Someone tonight said, well, it's in the 2015, 2018 contract. The mere fact, and Mr. Augusta alluded to this, the mere fact that there's a passing reference to Tier 2 doesn't mean that everything that's in Tier 2 gets into the contract unless it specifically says that, and it doesn't. So with respect, I just thought that that was important to clear up. People have been saying, well, we got bamboozled, it got snuck by us. Not by any written documents that were produced that I've seen. What was represented, I don't know. And the final thing is, the firefighters certainly had nothing to do with this, absolutely nothing. It was your solicitor that presented you with the final contract to sign. The solicitor prepared it, not the union.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Mr.
from
Chairman.
Members? Sir.
Yeah, I think the city solicitor wanted to respond to that.
Okay.
No. Council solicitor, he meant.
Oh,
due respect to my brother Joe, in the 2015-2018 tentative agreement, and what used to come before the council was the tentative agreement that had been signed by the mayor and the union president. In 2015, that tentative agreement contained a provision referencing Tier 2. And in the actual contract for that period, there is a section that was included regarding pension payments and distinguish between the amount of contributions for people in Tier 1 versus people in Tier 2. And the provision in the tentative agreement said that the contributions would be based on actuarial reports. And because the ordinance had been enacted back in 2011, there had been annual actuarial reports that contained the information about contributions. Did not mention benefits, but it did reference Tier 2 and contributions. I'm just clarifying the record. It's not that there was nothing there. There was something there in that 2015-2018 negotiated contract.
Just to summarize, John, I know we've been talking a lot about the 2012 contract, but the 2015 to 2018 contract, what you're telling us was there was not only an ordinance in place, but there were negotiated changes, obviously I was here, that specifically stated that those employees would be in Tier 2. I think you actually wrote a memo to us on this. And I think that was part of Mr. Augusta's dissent too, that the second contract had everybody in Tier 2. Is that?
I'll read it specifically. The 2015-2018 contract in Article 14, Section 1, it's entitled Pension Payments. Subsection B says in Tier 1, each member who is an employee, the amount of the member's contribution shall be adjusted to 1/3 of the annual contribution rate for Tier 1 determined by the actuary in accordance with Section 20-242 paren C. In Tier 2, each member who is an employee, the amount of the member's contribution shall be adjusted to 1/3 of the annual contribution rate for Tier 2, determined by the actuary in accordance with Section 20-242 paren C. The actuary shall evaluate Tier 1 and Tier 2 as a single fund for the purpose of determining the pension contributions for the city, the 2/3 share of the total, but shall determine separate employee contribution rates for members of Tier 1 and Tier 2, reflecting 1/3 of the difference in the value of the benefit being provided under this plan for the two tiers. There are no other provisions in that contract referencing the differences between Tier 1 and Tier 2, but the contribution levels were different, and the actuaries were determining those contribution levels on the basis of the benefits that were in the ordinance. I mean, I've seen the actuarial reports.
I have also, and I would agree with you, but you agree with me that none of the other Tier 2 benefits are set forth either by reference or by specific notations in that document that was presented.
What I read to you is the only reference that's in there to Tier 1 and Tier 2, but there was a reference, not that that document had no reference to Tier 2. That's what I wanted to clarify.
And I did say I misspoke, and I corrected myself because I remembered the contribution. So you and I are in agreement with that.
There's one thing I would like to say, which is I think we're all in agreement that contract language should be very clear, so we don't get in this situation again. Thank you.
Excuse me. Is there any other comments or questions from members of the public? Are there any other comments or questions from members of the public? Councilman McAllister?
Seconded.
We have a motion for favorable. We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Oppose. Vote stands 2 yes, 1 no. The Warwick City Council Finance Committee is adjourned. Yeah.
The school committee
Oh,
is here.
that's true. Okay, we're going to go back to the school committee.
Good evening, Philip Thornton, Superintendent. As you recall, council members, we were here last month talking about the voter-approved 40 million.
Excuse me, Superintendent, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, for clarification, we did do a vote favorable to the floor with no recommendation.
True. True.
Is it the committee's wish not to hear
Do you want to hear it
regarding
now?
the bond referendum from the school
hear-
department? Because we
they've been
can't hear
here
it.
They've been here for quite a while. Do you want to hear
If
it
you
now?
don't-
I respectfully agree with that comment that they've been here a while. I just wanted to make sure that we have all our ducks in a row.
Okay, need
I'm
advice
part
on how to allow this testimony to proceed?
It's
Motion to reconsider.
We have a motion to reconsider.
Seconded.
We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir, go ahead.
Thank you. As you recall, last month, we were here in front of the council talking about the voter-approved $40 million bond. Last time we were here, we took you through what we did in the last summer's projects and walked you through what would happen next summer. Just to review again for the council again for next summer, the highlights of the release would include 7 fire alarms, and that would take care of all the fire alarms in the district that need to be taken care of. 5 abatement projects, 5 ADA projects, 7 playgrounds, 4 roofs, totaling a bond effort of $9.8 million. As you recall, RIDE now has something called Pay-As-You-Go, where we actually get funds back from the state in the same term where we're actually doing the work. So in essence, the bond note from Council Grandy is for, I believe, a total of $6.8 million. And Brian has the document tonight for you to look at in terms of the details on the bond council's document. Happy to answer any questions.
Superintendent, so if this council were to approve the $6.855 million in these bonds, do you have a specific plan? So let me back up. When we approved the drawdown the first time,
The 6.2 last year.
right, what we had required was a plan. We had required documents showing exactly what you plan to do, the cost of each, an Excel spreadsheet in a manner of speaking. And that provided us with what you wanted to do, what the repairs were. They were actually prioritized, I believe.
Right, it actually looks like this. We have it
Yeah,
again
that's the one.
tonight. If you want more copies, I have them with me if you'd like them again.
Sure.
And while that's being passed out, as the councilman stated, we did detail out exactly what would be done and when it would be done. That's color-coded. You can see different shades of green. We notated what was done last summer in terms of roofs, ADA, and what's being done next summer. And also on the school website, we have detail on minutes of the building committee and actual bids that go out and all of that detail for the public to look at. So once again, I'm happy to answer any questions. We can see the dark green, I believe, is the color for next summer, 2021. You can see different projects by building. I believe Cedar Hill has some ADA, and by ADA, we're talking about things like bathrooms being changed from the 1950s configuration to 2019. We're talking about doorway enlargements. Asbestos, we still have asbestos. While it's safe and encapsulated, you can have it in the ceiling, you can have it in the floors. So there's work being done in the schools next year for some of those projects. And as we talked about last month, playgrounds. Our playgrounds are not ADA accessible. So in this plan, as you know, we would make playgrounds accessible for all students. So I believe we have 7 on the list for next summer.
And is there anything in this plan, this production schedule figured for Pilgrim?
No, right now, if you look on page 1, we notated we're not doing any work on the high schools until we consider the other question of where the high school conversation may go. So right now, we are not doing any work on the high schools until that time.
When you say the conversation of the school, this is the conversation with respect to the possibility of building a new high school?
Correct. Okay. Until we answer that question, we thought it prudent not to invest any more funds in the high schools so we can have that conversation.
And until such time as that conversation took place, what was the monies that were considered or discussed as far as Pilgrim School is concerned?
Right. Rough numbers, I want to say around $8-9 million for HVAC that's on that sheet in one of those years on the sheet there. Right now, HVAC at Pilgrim is a need, but we wouldn't want to invest those funds in Pilgrim if we weren't going to keep Pilgrim viable. Having said that, if you do choose to build a new Pilgrim, if you will, we would simply shift those funds to Windman. Windman has our newest HVAC system, circa 1972, and it did fail this past year, and we had to put a patch on it. This it's happening right now as we speak, actually, for $150,000. So we would simply shift those funds to Windman if we didn't build or keep Pilgrim viable.
So your request to this committee is for an approval of the second drawdown, I believe it is, right, on the $40 million bond that was approved by the voters.
That is correct. It's the second drawdown, $6,854,403, I believe.
And you also have, which I know you can provide if you have not provided, the current update for the monies that were allocated on the initial drawdown for your projected works,
Yeah, I can take you
completed,
through that.
et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, this past summer, just a quick overview once again for the group. We did fire alarms at Tollgate, Oakland Beach, and Scott. Abatement projects were completed at Scott, Cedar Hill, and Oakland Beach. ADA, one job completed at Cedar Hill. Roofs at Sherman and Tollgate. Projects still in process, finalizing the fire alarm upgrades at Warwick, Neck, and Robertson. Playgrounds to be completed in the spring at Warwick, Neck, and Lippet. And door hardware is an ongoing project throughout the next couple of years. The hardware right now is not ADA compliant and not really up to snuff.
And as we are here today, are you on time and on budget, or
We're
is there something different?
On time and a little under budget, as we mentioned last month.
Okay. Any questions from Councilman McAllister?
Thank you, Superintendent. And as you mentioned, that this $6.8 million, this is the second drawdown from the $40 million bond that the voters approved.
Correct.
I want to say that when you came before the council asking for that $40 million, you said that you would outline what each expense was going to be. You were going to give us, we're going to do these projects with this first part of the funding, and then we're going to come back to you again after we show you what we've done, and we're going to ask for the additional funding to be released, a second drawdown, if you will. I believe you have done that. You've come before us. You have outlined what you're doing. I'm very confident that you will continue to do that, and that's why I will be supporting the release of these funds today. And I thank you, and I look forward to continuing to working down this path and addressing these much-needed improvements for our schools.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Ho. Any questions
Yes.
from members of the council?
Yes.
Council President.
You had given us a spreadsheet tonight, and I'm assuming that that has the calculations on it as far as how much we're going to be expected to pay each year towards the principal and interest of the bonds.
I don't have that on this spreadsheet. I know Brian has the work from bond counsel. I'm not sure if that would be part of that calculation.
If you could go over that with us, Brian. How much has been released to date before this $9 million on the $40 million?
Roughly 5.5 million. I think it was 5,455,000, I believe.
Okay. And they're asking for a little over 9, but they're going to get reimbursed.
Correct.
So we still have to release that 9?
The total draw will be 9, but what we're actually issuing is the 6.8. And then the state will be funding the rest via the cash advance.
Okay. And so that would put us a little over 10 million
That we're going to have for funds for these projects, yes.
to date. And what would be the annual payment on that principal and interest?
So similar to the first drawdown, I don't know if you recall, but similar to the first drawdown, it was the recommendation to do interest only for the first year. So as it stands right now, our principal and interest payments for our debt service for FY21 will be $6,160,000 roughly. We have a significant drop off in fiscal year 22, very significant. So the recommendation would be to go to interest only for the first year, FY21. So that'd be interest payments of approximately, until we issue the debt, we don't know the rate, but approximately $270,000. So we'd have principal and interest payments in 21 of about 6.4 million. Once we go online with principal and interest in FY22, the payments would be on average $510,000 a year, and in FY22 our debt service would drop to $5,780,000 because we have retiring debt in FY22.
And we're expecting releases of up
Correct.
to 40 million.
Correct.
And what's the calculation on the principal and interest payments on those?
They're not being, I don't know what the next issue is going to be at this time.
So you're saying 510,000
For this
for principal and interest
Yes.
on about 10 million.
Well, we're paying principal and interest on the 6.8. The state is covering the rest as
And
a
then
pay-as-you-go.
the 5 that
We're
we've-
already paying. That's already
Right,
layered
so
into
is
our budget.
that 5 and that 6 included in the
Yes.
510?
That's correct.
So that's what I was saying. So you're looking at, once the total issuance is out there, you're looking, and the school department has exhausted the 40 million with reimbursements, we should be someplace around $2 million a year
Yes, for this, yes.
for this bond issuance.
Yes.
And we can raise about 8.3 million a year with a maximum tax increase,
Ballparking it, yes.
correct? And our structural deficit going into next year is 3.5 million?
Just want to confirm. 2.4. Our use of fund balance in FY20 is $2,441,000.
So when we went into this year and we amended our budget to give more funds to the school department, I thought it was represented that we'd be about $3.5 million short when we got to next year.
I believe within our initial proposed budget for 20, use of fund balance was over 3 million. I don't know if it was quite 3.5, but through the budget adoption process, it's been reduced to 2.4.
3.4?
2.4.
2.4. And what I'm saying is we made an additional amendment after that with regard to schools.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Right. So
Yes.
what is that number after that revision as far as the structural deficit goes?
The additional, I'm sorry, what?
Sure. We gave the school department additional funds, which increased the testimony was it's going to increase our structural deficit for next year. And I thought that the total number was around 3.5, but I might be wrong. That's why I was asking you.
Our use of fund balance right now in FY20 is $2,441,000.
So our structural deficit for this year at the present time, 2.4 million.
Going into next year, yes.
Okay. So if we subtract that out, we're at, we're at 9. So we'll be able to raise not the 8.3 million that we needed, but more along the lines of 6 million. And the reason that I point that out is what is the estimate? So for next, well, I'm trying to figure out all the numbers we're looking at tonight, which is probably an unfair thing to do because we do have to pass a budget in a few months. And what is our rainy day fund? I mean, I know there was testimony in March, it was 13 or 14 million. What is it today? What's our rainy day fund today?
The city's most recent audit, $22,671,446.
22 million?
Yes, 671,446.
Thank you. And I just had a question for the superintendent, Mr. Thornton. Phil, I know from speaking with you, Pilgrim was the problem, I guess, if you will, as far as repairs go, and as far as accreditation goes, and the cost of
Sure.
to bring that building up to speed so we're not in danger of losing accreditation. And there was some scale they gave us.
Right. RIDE, a couple years back, had a study of all the schools in Rhode Island called the Jacobs Report, and they have a number. A low number is good, a high number is bad. A number, 65 or over, and your building is essentially totaled. It's beyond. Pilgrim's at 59. Tollgate was around 29. So Pilgrim is very close to being, at the point of not being fixed or repaired.
And when's the last time we did build a new building?
I'm sorry?
When's the last time we built a new school building?
A new building, 1972 is our newest building.
That's for schools. Because I know since I've been here, we've had new fire departments in 2010, 2000, 1990, and 1980. But no new schools. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. Chairwoman Backus, anything? Okay.
You were talking about it. Our OPEB currently for medical and all is under $27 million.
Unfunded?
Under 27 million?
Under $27 million unfunded on our OPEB.
So, just to be clear, your unfunded liability on OPEB is 27 million, and the teachers don't have lifetime health care.
No.
Thank you.
No,
And you
they
have-
run the same as state employees.
How many employees do you have?
We have 900, about 1,300, 1,400.
Interesting. Okay, thank
With
you.
everybody, we have about 900
Right.
teachers.
900 teachers. Okay, thank you. Any other comments, questions from members of the public? Do we have any comments or questions from members of the public? Hearing none, I need a motion.
Seconded.
We have a motion for favorable. We have a second. All in favor? Aye. Motion passes, and now we are adjourned, and it is 11:03.
I call the ordinance committee at 11:05. First up is acceptance of the minutes, December 2nd. Do I have a motion? So moved.
Second.
Moved in second. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you. One item is PCO 18-15, an ordinance regarding to the trash collection of large items and heavy pickups. This is for second passage. Councilman Lattiser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Move favorable action.
All right, I will take that, and I will actually make the motion of favorable action for Second Amendment. Do I have any comments from members of the committee? Any members of the council? Any members of the public would like to speak on an ordinance regarding the trash collection of large items and heavy pickups? This is for second passage. If not, do I have a second to the motion for favorable action?
Second.
Moved in second. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you very much. That closes the ordinance committee at 11:06.
Thank you.
See if the chief wants some.
Public Safety Committee will convene at 11:08. First item of business, acceptance of minutes from the December 2nd, 2019 committee meeting.
Move favorable action.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next item of business, PCO-25-19, ordinance in regards to no parking between signs either side be erected from the southeast corner of Cador and Greenwich until shortly after poll number 1. This is for me, actually. I'd like to hold this until January 6th so I can convene with the solicitor about some language.
Seconded. You held until, what'd you say?
So we have a motion made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And then we have PCR 190-19, resolution relative to claims, the Regusta claim. We discussed this at the last meeting. Did we have notice go out? We did have notice go out. Is Mr. or Mrs. Regusta here? Is Mr. or Mrs. Regusta here regarding a claim?
Mr. Chairman, understanding the situation and the extended time of the committee this evening, I have no problem holding this until the next meeting.
Seems more than fair. We have a motion.
Motion to hold PCR 1620. Am I right? Oh, I apologize. Withdrawn. Motion to hold PCR 190-19 till January 6th meeting.
Second.
Not to rain on your parade, but given that this meeting is likely going to run over, and that means our next meeting will be a double, we might be better off holding this to the subsequent January meeting. That way, the claimant's not in the same situation they would have been in tonight.
Motion withdrawn.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. We can't hear you over here.
He said the meeting, this one went late, so that means we're going to probably double up on the next meeting, so I'm just going to hold it until the second meeting of January. Motion to hold PCR 190-19 till second meeting of January.
Second.
Do you have a date for that? All right, so motion made and seconded to hold this until January 22nd. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And that concludes public safety at 11:10.
No, Tim Howe, he's just boycotting it. Okay, this is the Intergovernmental Committee agenda for December 16th, beginning at 11:11 p.m. The first item on the agenda is the acceptance of the minutes from the meeting held on December 2nd, 2019.
Motion for favorable action.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The second item, well, the only other item on the agenda is PCR 180-19, a resolution to the General Assembly requesting a waiver/exemption to ride regulation requirements. It's not drafted. Councilman Lattiser.
Per request of the sponsor, hold PCR 180-19 till January 2nd.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The committee ends at 11:12. Wouldn't believe me, huh?
We're all set, Mr. President. Thank you. The council will come to order, and the clerk will call the roll. Here. Here. Here.
Yeah.
Here.
Councilman Howe, if you could lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is executive session of the City Council pursuant to Rhode Island General Laws 4246-5A2. This public body will convene into executive session to discuss pending litigation with the City of Warwick versus Local 2748 et al., which is KM 2019-0666. Council will stand adjourned and we'll go downstairs.